Okay, continuing to go through quotes from the Holy Grail of Wisdom quotes by me, Pete Rogers, alphabetical order. This guy, Bill McGowan, he wrote a good book called Pitch Perfect. It's one of those, public speaking books. I read this many years ago, gosh, probably at least 10 years ago. And, I found it helpful. My favorite line in the whole book was hydrate before you orate. Visual storytelling is a sweet spot of communication. Okay, and by the way, in terms of hydrate before you orate, what I found most helpful, if I'm giving a long lecture, is I'll guzzle down 32 ounces of beet juice and I'll chase it with about 16 ounces of water, reverse osmosis filtered water. And I just know from experience, if I have to give a long talk, like an hour and a half, 2 hours, sometimes I give 3-hour talks, that energizes me optimally. I would do that before I work out as well, if I'm trying to go for a personal best, maximum, back when I used to do a lot of high rep squats. I would drink it at least an hour and a half to 2 hours before. That gives you the optimal blood glucose level and hydration before giving a talk. I just noticed the words would come faster. I give tons of presentations. I run conferences. I'm very used to public speaking, and I just know that gets me at my best. What else did I learn from him? Visual storytelling is a sweet spot of communication. So, yeah, you don't want to just give a list of things. That's boring. If you can put things into a story, a narrative, that's more interesting. Also, the pictures are better. People like a picture, so it's more memorable. I mentioned before Dennis Burkett. He would do a speaking circuit where he wouldn't come back for maybe 10 years. And he said people would still remember 10 years later some of the pictures that he had shown. And I've read, the Lionel Standing paper. People, you could show them 10,000 pictures and the next day they'll remember almost all those pictures, the vast majority of them. Whereas, if you show them 10,000 words, they're not going to remember the 10,000 words. But our memories are very good for pictures. So it's good to start with pictures. There's a guy by the name of Johnny Harris. He's pretty good at presenting stuff, and he also talks about the first image should orientate the audience. Like if you're going to talk about another country or something, show them a map where that country is so they're orientated to it. Then show them an image of what you're going to talk about, then talk about it. That helps them to engage and know what you're talking about and enjoy it better. So that's all good. And our brains, it's other people have said, they're really more of a story processor than a logic processor. So putting information in the context of a story makes it better. McGowan says, do not let friends ad-lib on controversial topics, because a lot of times they'll say something stupid for their audience. So be careful about doing that. He said, don't talk about controversial stuff unless you prepared in advance, and be careful. He says, be positive. If you say a negative, they have to almost, invert the negative such that it's more difficult for them to understand. Like Nixon should have said, I'm a distinguished service career. That would have been a better way for him to phrase what he was talking about. I like the idea of embodied simulation, whereby the mind starts to visualize what you're saying as you go along, so that if you begin with a concrete subject, then follow it with the verb, people can follow that much better. So what does that mean? For example, let's say I'm talking about the liver, all right? And I look at thousands of livers, okay? So if I say there is no evidence of a tumor in the liver, you don't know what I'm talking about until I say the liver. So whenever I'm discussing something anatomical and medical, I'll start with the organ first. The liver has no evidence of a tumor. That's easy to follow, because as soon as you hear liver, you're like, does it have a tumor, yes or no? Okay. It's just like, it's basically using active voice, and the same thing like if you're talking about a dog, you'd say the dog chased the cat. That's easy to follow. But if you say the cat was chased by the dog, that's harder to follow, sort of like, could it have been something else? Could have been another cat. All right, anyway, so Bill McGowan had a pretty good book on public speaking and coaching people for interviews and things like that. Next is Ian McGilchrist. He's a psychiatrist, and he became surprisingly famous for just talking about the difference between the right brain and the left brain. And this is something I talk about a lot because I'm always teaching residents and other people about the brain. And basically, your left brain, you can remember L for language, L for linear, L for logical brain. And that's your standard language. Please pass the salt, if you would, please. That kind of stuff. Versus the right brain, and the left brain is predatory. It focuses in on a small thing like a bird eating breadcrumbs. He's actually got a really good video, Ian McGilchrist, one of those RSA animated videos where he talks about right brain versus left brain. I'll try to remember to put a link in the description below. So basically, the left brain would be like a bird on the ground eating individual pieces of bread, and it's focused on 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of bread, versus the right brain's more like the predator mind, looking around. Is there a dog coming, a raccoon coming? Is there a hawk in the sky? There's a man walking a dog over there. So it has more awareness of its surrounding. The right brain puts together more of a comprehensive worldview, and in a sense, it's two types of reasoning. The left brain, linear logical brain, like what you use for school and your job most of the time, is sort of like deductive reasoning, like an Aristotelian syllogism. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore he's mortal. You have complete information to work with, versus the right brain is more like inductive logic, like consilience. This is associated with this, is associated with this, and they all point in this direction, therefore that is probably true. And again, it's the prey brain. Is anything coming after me? I have to be aware of my surroundings. And the type of language of the right brain is more like a metaphor, a joke, singing, poetry, all of that kind of stuff. So it's a valuable type of language. They think religion is a lot in that right side of the brain, and it's more interested in putting together a comprehensive picture of what's going on. That sort of inductive reasoning. You have incomplete information. I for inductive, I for incomplete information. Okay, so what else does he say? And he does have a really good lecture on it. He's really good on that subject, he's like a lot of people. He's a little bit of a one-trick pony, but he's a good one-trick pony. I call somebody a one-trick pony if they always talk about the same thing, okay? Like Esselstyn is a fantastic atherosclerosis researcher. He deserves a Nobel Prize, but he tends to talk about the same thing all the time, okay? He does a magnificent job of it, but... Okay, let's see what else. He says, the left brain is for grabbing something quickly to eat it. The right brain was awareness of the environment. You get some crossover between the right and left side of the brain through the corpus callosum, for example. Okay. All right, that's enough on McGilchrist. All these MCs, because I'm going in alphabetical order. Kelly McGonical. Usually... that means like son of, and so I think of all these Scots-Irish people with all these Mick names. And also it's sort of like a slang for an Irish person is to call them a Mick. And then, my mother was Puerto Rican, so when I was growing up, that was the joke, that I looked Italian because I'm a Mick, I'm a spick and a Mick, and a spick and a Mick makes a Dago. So that's what used to be said to me when I was young. I grew up around a bunch of Italians, a lot of Hispanics too. Anyways, Kelly McGonical, she wrote a book about stress. Here's some quotes from her. When you choose to view your stress response as helpful, you create the biology of courage. You need a little stress to energize you, get you psyched up to do whatever you're going to do. Like if you're lifting weights, you want to get a little psyched up. You want to have a friend there, a buddy you're working out with. You want the music on loud. If you have some spectators, great. Some women, that'd be even better. That'll energize you, get your adrenaline higher to lift more weight. Okay, chasing meaning is better for your health than trying to avoid discomfort. Yeah, having a sense of purpose makes you resilient, and you can focus, and you can ignore the little things that are bothering you more effectively. Good to go after what it is that creates meaning in your life, and then to trust yourself to handle the stress that follows. Yeah, it's not a big deal when it's for a purpose, sort of. And this has been pretty widely known. This is things that... Schopenhauer has said this, and so has Dostoevsky, and so has Viktor Frankl, and so has Thomas Schaas. When you have meaning, that makes you happier. Then you have a purpose. You have a reason to get out of bed. And then you're better able to tolerate all the BS you have to tolerate and the tedium. Kelly McGonical, self-awareness, self-care, and remembering what matters most are foundational for self-control. It's a little bit like the attitude of gratitude concept. All those things make you more resilient. Religion's helpful too. You sort of give your stress over to God, your problems. Okay, Doug McDuff, MD. He's a guy, I think he's a big weightlifter guy, and he's a physician. I think he maybe partly owns a health club. So he's very pro lifting weights. And I do think lifting weights is really good for you to maintain your strength. I no longer do squats though, because I worry about that getting your blood pressure too high and maybe over time causing a loss of the Windcastle effect in your ascending thoracic aorta. I have reason to say that. I'm not sure of that, but I think it's true. Yeah, but you got to lift weights. I've seen papers of people who lift weights and they can maintain pretty good muscle mass. You know, you're never going to be 20 years old again, but you can maintain pretty decent muscle mass as you get older if you lift weights. And I wouldn't jump into testosterone replacement therapy unless you had to. You know, like for example, I'm 62 years of age and I can do, about 48 push-ups I did today, which is kind of low for me, but I can routinely do 50. Sometimes on a good day I can do a lot more than that. When I was a young guy, I could do tons of push-ups, 120, 130, okay? But, you're not as strong when you get older. And the other thing, too, is when you're young, you get all the time in the world to sleep, you got a lot of free time to rest, to work out hard. When you're old, you're tired, you're working all the time. So anyways, yeah, you got to do endurance exercise and some form of weightlifting as you get older. It's because it's use it or lose it, or the muscles atrophy, and you just keep getting weaker. So you don't want that to happen. Anyways, that's the quotes for today. Hope you found them helpful.